I would like from you guys to please try these first two examples for me. I'm throwing you straight in. You're going to give it a try. They're not too tricky. Just quickly, number 2, I put in an extra equal sign for some unknown reason in whatever state of mind I was in. So I want you, please, guys, to try example 1 and example 2 for me. I want your answers on the chat. Please remember to number them. So 1 answer, 2 answer, and then we'll go through them in a few minutes. I'll give you, I want to say 2 minutes, but let's see when I start getting answers coming in. Right now, you're solving these 2 equations, and I want your answers in the chat. Guys, I've just told you how I want your answers. Your answers in the chat must be 1, x equals, 2, x equals. You need to number your answers for each of these questions exactly there so that we know which answer is which. All right, so remember everything that we've learned about inverse operations, getting x alone, solving for x, and apply that to these 2 questions, and let's see what you get. Sorry, everyone. Again, remember to number your answers, remember your inverse operations, and let's solve for x here. Remember, guys, once you have your answers, please remember to check them. We check them through substitution. So you should be 100% confident with the answer that you're giving in terms of you've checked it, you know it's correct when you type it on the chat. And remember that it is okay to get fractions and negative answers and all of those things. It's absolutely fine. I'm sure there was more that I was going to say, but now it's slipped out of my head again. So yes, those things, remember those things. Fractions are fine. And you're my memory, whatever else I said. It's clearly been a day. Please try and leave your answers in or as a fraction. It's not wrong to write it as a decimal or a mixed number, but the fraction is the most accurate form. The second you start moving to decimals, you are generally rounding off, which means you're making that value inaccurate. Okay. Let's have a look. Grade 8, it looks like we've got an answer for both of them. Let's have a look. Now, like I said, these are not too tricky, but please make sure that you're marking and correcting as we go along. Remember, the goal of any equation is to solve for x. So I want to get this x alone, and I want to solve for x. What that means is this -1 and this times 3 are not really working for me. I need to get x alone, so I need to get rid of those things. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to use my inverse operations and add 1 on both sides so that this becomes 0 and I'm left with just 3x on the left. So that would mean I've got 3x is equal to 5 plus 1. And now, guys, remember, this is where inverse operations comes in. And the inverse or the opposite of -1 is +1. So that's why we use inverse operations to almost bring the 1 over the equal sign so that we get the x term alone. What I now want to do maybe I should say 5 plus 1 first. What I now want to do is I can see that I've got 3 times x, so I've got a coefficient of x there, and so I need to deal with that and get rid of it. Because it's 3 times x, the inverse or the opposite operation of times is divide. So I'm going to divide both sides by 3. And please remember to divide both sides by 3. You can't do one thing to the left and not do it to the right. You're not keeping the equation balanced then. That then means that the 3's essentially divide away. 3 divided by 3 we know is 1. So I'm left with 1x or just x. And 6 divided by 3 is 2. So nothing too tricky there, quite straightforward for that one. Hopefully we all got that right. I will come back for you guys to take a screenshot in a second, but let's go through question 2 and then I'll make it smaller for screenshots. Right, so guys, question 2, what we needed to be careful of, is the fact that I had an x term on both sides of my equation, as well as a constant term on both sides of my equation. And we know that when we've got x's on both sides, we want to group them together onto one side of my equation so that I can solve. Now, guys, I've said this to you before. I always put my x terms on the left. There's no reason for that, really. You can put them on the left or the right. It makes absolutely no difference. As long as you apply your inverse operations correctly, you will be fine. So if you have put them on the right-hand side, that's fine. I'm going to take this minus 4x. I'm going to join it with the negative 11x. And so using inverse operations, I'm essentially adding 4x to both sides. What that now means is I've got minus 11x plus 4x plus 1 is equal to 3. And now remember, I only want x's on the left. So what that means is this plus 1 now needs to have its inverse operation applied to it, so minus 1, so that I've got only the x terms on the left-hand side and my constants on the right-hand side. Maybe it would help if I wrote everything down here. Okay. On the left, I've got negative 11 plus 4x. Now, you've got a calculator. You can just do this on your calculator. If for whatever reason you're not allowed a calculator, and you struggle with these sorts of additions and subtractions, what you need to do is you need to go and draw a number line for yourself. So here I am at negative 11x. I want to add 4, so I'm moving up my number line towards positive infinity. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that leaves me at, who knows why those disappeared, 1, 2, 3, 4. That leaves me at negative 7. So minus 11x plus 4x is negative 7x. And we know that 3 minus 1 is 2. Now be very careful here, grade 8s. We need to get rid of this coefficient of negative 7. So that means I need to divide both sides by negative 7. I want a positive 1x, which means that that negative has to be divided as well. Remember that a positive divided by a negative is a negative, and so my answer here should be negative. And 2 divided by 7, I can't simplify that. And so it's just 2 over 7. Who knows what's happening? Now, this is what I said earlier. Just leave it as a fraction. There's no point in trying to make it a decimal or trying to do anything else with it. Leave it as a fraction. That is absolutely fine. If you have written it as a decimal, that is also fine. I think it's negative 0.29. Just double check myself. It is fine. But like I say, the second you start making or converting to a decimal, it means you're going to have to round it off. And the second we start rounding it off, we're making that value not as accurate as it could be. So rather just leave it as a fraction. You will obviously get the marks either way, but I always just leave my answers as a fraction. Just make sure it is simplified. 2 over 7, I can't simplify any further, so that is my answer. Alrighty, so there you go. You can take screenshots of those two. If anyone has any questions, now is the time to raise your hand to ask me. Otherwise, we're going to have a look at a couple more. Forgot to turn my main light on, so we're dealing with the lamp here, but anyway. No questions, grade 8? Cool. Okay. So if we now have a look at question 3, what we need to remember when we have a situation like this is that distribution has to happen first. We said this when we did our lesson on distribution and fractions in equations, but I told you very, very importantly that we have to distribute first. So what that means is this -2 has to be multiplied or distributed to the +3 and the negative x in the bracket. And this +9 needs to be multiplied or distributed to the 2 and the x. So distribution has to happen first before we start stressing about any of our inverse operations and solving the equation. So now that you've got that little hint, I want you guys to try this question while I quickly put on my light. But let's try it. Let's put our answers in the chat and let's see what we get. Please remember, check your answer. Use substitution to make sure that your answer is correct. Okay, so we're distributing and we're solving for x. And again, guys, remember to do your check. As I've said to you before, anytime you are doing a test or an exam or any sort of question with equations, you should always be checking your answers. Waiting for answers in the chat. There we go. Ortile is on it. Again, guys, double check your answers. Make sure you agree with your answers. And just remember, any fraction answers should always be simplified. Everyone putting answers so far in the chat. While you're waiting, you should be checking your answers, making sure that you agree with what you've written down. Guys, remember the check doesn't have to be a whole neat working out. Do it on your calculator, do it on a rough piece of paper or in pencil on the side. That's absolutely fine. But do make sure that you check. It's a very, very easy way to make sure that you can bank these marks. Give you another minute or so. A very mixed batch of answers, and I hope all of you are checking to know whether or not you've done it correctly. And again, guys, when we go through this, make sure that you are marking your answers. Right, grade 8, let's have a look. So remember I said the first thing that we do is distribute. Now notice I didn't mention anything about this x right at the start of my equation. So this x over here, remember, is a completely separate term. I will deal with it when I start solving my equation, but in terms of the distribution, it's not having anything distributed to it. So it's just going to stay x for now. I'll deal with it later. So there's that x. Now I start with the distribution. -2 times +3 is -6. And -2 times -x, remember, negative times a negative is a positive, and 2 times x gives us positive 2x. That is then equal to 9 times 2, which is 18, and the second distribution, 9 times positive x, which is 9x. Now, guys, quickly, what I want you to notice is that on the left-hand side, you've got like terms. Now, remember, if you think back to the algebra we did way back when, like terms are really important because you can add and subtract them. Now, you don't have to add the x with the 2x. It makes no difference. As long as you still apply all of your inverse operations, you will get the same answer. But what it does do is it decreases the number of terms we have to stress about. So I am going to add them together. X plus 2x gives me 3x minus 6 is equal to 18 plus 9x. Now, hopefully what you can then see is that I have gone from 1, 2, 3 terms on the left-hand side to now only 2 terms. So I'm just making life a little easier for myself. I don't have to work with as many terms. I'm making life simple. You don't have to, but you can if there are like terms. Right, the next thing that's going on is I want this 9x to move to the left, and so inverse operations minus 9x. That will leave me with, on the left-hand side, 3x minus 9x. And then I want to do the same thing or similar thing with the -6. I don't really want it on the left. So this -6 I want to bring over to become +6 on the right-hand side. And so I've got 3x minus 9x is equal to 18 plus 6. So remember, 9x became negative because of the inverse operation. -6 became +6, again, inverse operations. Right, 3x minus 9x, again, use your calculator, use your, you said your timetable, use your number line. But 3x minus 9x is -6x. And then on the right, 18 plus 6 is 24. Now to solve this equation, we're not done yet. We still have that coefficient there, so I want to divide both sides by -6. -6 divided by -6 essentially, remember, leaves us with 1. So I've gotten my x alone. And now I need to be careful. I've got positive 24 divided by -6. So positive divided by negative, 24 divided by 6 is 4. And so my solution here, x is equal to 4. Now, guys, remember, you can double check yourself. Substitute, make sure you've got it. I think, Luanzi, exactly what you said there. I think a lot of you forgot or didn't see that x right at the start. And so please just make sure that when you do get these questions or read your questions, make sure that you are reading them correctly and properly before you start answering them, because leaving out a term whilst it's just a mistake, it's a mistake that will cost you the marks, because unfortunately then you are not being able to get the correct answer. Okay, but essentially here, distribute first, then you go and do all of your inverse operations and you can get your solution. And guys, again, it's fine to make the mistakes here. This is where you should be making the mistakes. The lesson now is to learn from it. So like I say, make sure that when you get questions, you read them properly so that we don't leave out terms. And that's often actually what happens. We forget a term, or we forget the -1 or the x or whatever, and we then leave it out of our working out. Right, but screenshots, if anyone has any questions, now's the time to raise your hand and ask me. Otherwise, we're going to do one more and then take a brain break. Thank you for the wishes, guys. Happy Women's Day to all of you as well. Again, I'm just waiting if anyone has questions and for you guys to screenshot. Otherwise, I'm going to go down to our next example before our brain break. Alrighty. Okay, guys, let's focus. Appreciate the wishes. We're looking at our next example here, which is 2x cubed is equal to 128. So again, I want you to give it a try. Remember all of your inverse operations. This one, I don't want to say trickier, but this one, what we now need to remember is that we've got an exponent or power there. So we need to think about what the inverse of a power or of an exponent is. But give this one a try, put it in the chat, and we'll check your answers in 2 minutes. So let's focus and let's do question 4 here. Guys, remember, once you have an answer, to check your answer by substituting back into the original equation. And that way you'll know if your answer is correct or not. I'm glad we're checking and correcting and making sure that we are doing the right thing here. And again, if you're not sure, substitute. That is the way you check your answers. Equations is a really nice section because you can check your answers. You can make sure that you are getting the right answer. Okay, let's have a look. So guys, what's really important here is exactly what I said when you started off. You need to remember what the inverse of a power is. So if we just look on the side, if you've been given something that's cubed, so any value cubed, I've just used x, but it could be anything cubed. The inverse operation of that is to then cube root. It would be the same thing if you were working with a square, right? So if you were given a value squared, the inverse of squaring something is to square root. And so those are the two inverse operations that we now need to bear in mind when we go and have a look at this question. Right, obviously the cube root one more than the square one because we're not squaring anything, but we are cubing something here. Now, the first thing that I see is that not only do I have the cube to deal with, I also have the coefficient of 2. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to divide both sides by 2 to get rid of that coefficient. That then leaves me with just the x cubed on the left-hand side and with 64 on the right-hand side. 128 divided by 2 is 64. Right, now this is where my inverse operations come in. I have got an x cubed. I don't want that cubed there. So to get rid of the cubed, I'm going to cube root both sides. What that does is it cancels out the cubed. But again, if I'm doing that on the left, I must do that on the right. So I need to cube root 64. Now, guys, you can do this on your calculator. Some of you might know this in your head, so it's honestly whichever one. But on your calculator's so dirty. If you look above the square root button, so there's a square root button. Right above it, there's in yellow a cube root. So what we want to do is we want to say shift cube root, and your calculator will give you your cube root. You then type in the value you want to cube root. So here we want to cube root 64. Once you do that, your calculator gives you your answer of what the cube root is. And so without doing too much, we've gotten that our answer is 4. Now, guys, if you just think about this for a second, if you have 4 times 4 times 4, why am I timesing 4 4s? Well, because I was working with cubes and cube roots. 4 times 4 is 16. So 16 times that third 4 is 64. 64 was the number underneath my square root. So yes, 64 cube rooted is 4. You could also substitute it back into your equation, and you would see that 4 is the correct answer. But what's really, really important here, grade 8, is that you remember these inverse operations when it comes to powers and when it comes to exponents. Okay, we have to remember those in order to apply or in order to solve our equations when it comes to dealing with powers. Screenshots, if you have questions, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, we're going to have a brain break, and then we'll have a look at a few more examples. Again, I hope that everyone was marking and correcting where they maybe went wrong or didn't really understand something. Hopefully we all do now. Settle, that is completely up to you. Alrighty, guys, brain break time. Just do this. Okay, so if you don't know what a brain break is, it means that you are either new or you have not listened when we've done brain breaks in the past. But what we want to do is we want to work out the value of this final equation down at the bottom. So what you need to do is you need to use everything that you have now learned about solving equations to work out the value of the kites, the dice, and the chess piece in order to work out the value of the last equation. So I know what the answer is. Yolanda knows what the answer is. We are going to wait for the first person to put the answer on the chat, and that person will then go and explain this brain break question to us. So we wait in anticipation to see the answer. Remember, these are equations. We have been doing equations for 3 weeks. We can solve them. You can do it. Again, we're waiting for the answer in the chat, and the first person who gets it will be able to explain it to us if you would like to. But please try it. It's still practicing what we've been talking about with solving equations. So it does have a purpose, and it does allow you to practice what we are talking about. I do see answers coming through. Unfortunately, they're not correct. So double check your working out. I will tell you when they are. Linda, I'm glad you're enjoying the joke. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes. If we haven't got it by then I will go through it. Make sure you're applying all of your knowledge about solving equations. Some close answers, but we're not there yet. Sinclair, well done. So
well done, the winner of today's quiz. Nice.
Sinclair, do you want to raise your hand and you can explain it for us? Otherwise, there we go. Wonderful. Okay, Sinclair, tell us.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
So I started by saying 48 divided by 6 because I said 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. The 3 2 quite, so I said 2 times 2 times 2, which gave me 2 4 6. Then I said 48 divided by 6, which gave which gave me 8.
Good.
So I found out that one kite is 8. Then the next step, I said 64. See, 8. I say 64 minus 8,
Good.
which gave me 56. Then I say 56. Then I say 56 divided by 8, which gave me 7.
Excellent.
Then I found out the 2 dices are 14.
Good.
And I said then I say 32 minus 7, which gave me 25. Then I said 20. Then I say 25. No, ma'am, I forgot this.
Okay, no, that's okay. This one was a hard one. So guys, Zintle has very, my English is going to be really bad here, but very nicely used inverse operations. So when we look at this third equation, we know that we've got 7 times something plus that same value must give us 32. So you almost have to do a bit of, you know, I don't want to say guesswork, but essentially something to that effect. However, you could set this up as an equation. We know that BODMAS has to apply. So if we make these chess pieces x, what you have is 7x plus x must give you 32. And so what we have then is 8x equals 32 because 7x plus x is 8x. If we then solve for x, we would divide both sides by 8. So that gives us 8, 16, 24, 4. And so that means that each of these chess pieces here is equal to 4. Okay, so 4, and again, you can set up an equation to do that, which means that 2 chess pieces in this final step is equal to 8. Now remember, BODMAS, 8 times 14 must give us 112, plus 8 gives us 120. And so our final answer here is 120. Alrighty, so as I've shown you, this is solving an equation. You can use everything that you know about equations to do that, and we can get our brain break answer. Panic. Alrighty, but let's have a look at some more examples here. So example 5 deals with a fraction. Again, I want you to try it by yourself. Answers in the chat. Let's see what we come up with. 3x divided by 4 plus 5 is equal to 2. So give this one a try. Answers in the chat. So I hope not indefinitely, but we understand for now. But hopefully we are trying this question. Okay, so guys, we're giving it a try and we're putting our answers on the chat. Remember, once you have an answer, you should be checking through substitution to decide if your answer is correct. Please check. Great. Oh, excuse me. Grade 8, please remember, check your answers. I'm getting a couple different ones coming through here, so we need to be checking to make sure that we agree with what you are writing down in the chat. I'm going to give you 1 more minute and then we're going to go through it. Oh. Okay, it seems like we're getting there. Right, so let's have a look. Again, guys, remember the whole point is that we're solving for x. So I want to get that x by itself, which means that I have to deal with the plus 5, the divide by 4, and the times 3. So there's 3 inverse operations I'm going to have to apply here. So the first one I'm going to deal with is this plus 5 using inverse operations. I'm going to subtract 5 on both sides so that on the left, I just have the fraction containing the x. So 3x divided by 4 is then equal to 2 minus 5, inverse operations. So that means on the right, 3x, on the left, 3x minus, I'm going to start my sentence again. On the left, we now have 3x divided by 4, and on the right, 2 minus 5 is negative 3. Right, now that we've got that fraction alone, the next thing I want to deal with is this denominator. Remember, this is saying divided by 4. So the inverse or the opposite operation is to times by 4 in order to get rid of that denominator. But if you're going to do that on the left, we have to multiply by 4 on the right. And so what we now have on the left is just the 3x because we got rid of the denominator. And on the right, we've got minus 3 times 4, which gives us negative 12. I still have that coefficient that I need to deal with, and we know that to deal with a coefficient, we divide by the coefficient because it was 3 times x, so the opposite is division. And so we've got negative 12 divided by 3. Now, guys, remember, a negative divided by a positive is a negative, so x is equal to negative 4 because 12 divided by 3 is 4. Oh, interesting. So very, very importantly, when it comes to fractions, grade 8, is the fact that we have a denominator that we need to deal with. Oh, we have a denominator that we need to deal with, and then most of the coefficients. And just off what Teto said there, always try and get rid of your oh my gosh, my brain. Try and get rid of your denominator first. So Teto, the reason why that is very important is because if we take that term, so 3x over 4, its coefficient is not actually 3. If we break this down, this would actually be 3 over 4x, so 3 over 4 times x. And so the coefficient that we're working with there is actually 3/4. So technically, if we then wanted to get rid of it, we would have to divide by 3/4 on both sides, which is unnecessarily complicating things. But just bear in mind, we want to break up our fraction and we deal with the denominator first. Right, guys, so screenshots, if anyone has any questions, I'm sorry that my brain had a bit of a brain fart there, it just stopped working. If anyone has any questions, please ask. Otherwise, we're going to have a look at another fraction type question. Remember, questions, you can raise your hand if you have them. Okay. Righto, so I want you guys to try 1 and 2 for me. What I am going to do is I'm just going to move 2 over so that, I don't know why I made that choice. Wild. So I want you to try 1 and 2 for me. Again, I want answers on the chat. So number your answers 1 and 2 for me. I'm going to give you 5 minutes and then we'll go through them, and then that will take us to the end of our lesson. So try 1 and try 2 for me. Again, fractions, work slowly through it. Think about your inverse operations. And grade 8, again, once you have an answer, please check it. Oh. And remember what we've just said about inverse operations with fractions. To get rid of a denominator, we need to multiply. Remember to number your answers and remember to check them using substitution. Please remember grade 8, in both of these questions, the whole expression of 4x minus 1 and 2x minus 1 are being divided by 3. So it's the whole numerator being affected by the denominator. Going to give you another minute or so. Oh, we've got a mixed bag of answers. Okay, guys, because I don't want to run out of time and I want you to see these answers, I'm going to go through them. So if we start with question 1, remember I said to you the whole numerator is being affected by that denominator. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of that denominator. So I'm going to times both sides by 2 so that I no longer have a fraction and so that I can start getting that x alone. So now I've got 4x minus 1 is equal to negative 2 times positive 2, which is negative 4. So again, by multiplying by that 2, I no longer have the fraction to worry about. Next thing, this negative 1, I wanted to join the negative 4, so I'm going to use inverse operations, adding 1 on both sides. So 4x is equal to minus 4 plus 1, which we know gives us negative 3. So minus 4 plus 1, negative 3. Once we've done that, remember we still have that coefficient that we're not so keen on, so we still need to divide both sides by 4 because that will get us x alone. And so for question 1 of example 2, x is equal to negative 3 over 4. And guys, remember again, substitute and double check your answers. If we now go over to example 2, very much the same thing, except for the fact that I have a plus 7 here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my inverse operations and bring it over to join the negative 2. So what I now have is this 2x minus 1, and I'm just going to keep it in brackets to remind myself that that whole expression is being divided by 3 is equal to minus 2 minus 7, which is minus 9. This is now where, or the point where I can deal with this fraction. So I'm going to times 3 on both sides so that I no longer have this fraction to worry about. And so on the left-hand side, got there in the end, on the left-hand side, I've got 2x minus 1. But on the right, I've now got negative 9 times 3. Now, negative times a positive is a negative, and 9 times 3 is 27. What I now need to remember again is I still got this minus 1 here, which I need to deal with. So again, inverse operations, I'm going to add 1 on both sides. And so that's going to leave me with 2x is equal to, now be careful, minus 27 plus 1 gives me a negative 26. Not negative 28, negative 26. We've moved 1 up our number line towards the positive side. negative 26. I still don't want that coefficient, so I do need to divide both sides by 2. And so this gives me a final value of x is equal to negative 13. Alrighty. So guys, hopefully we have marked. I hope that we've seen where we potentially went wrong. I think it was probably quite silly mistakes. Please remember, as I've said, that this whole expression, 4x minus 1 and 2x minus 1, the whole thing is being affected by that denominator. And so we need to remember that when we start dividing or multiplying things away. What you will see is Yolanda's put the quiz link on the chat for you. So you can grab that quiz link. I will wait for you to take screenshots, and if anyone has any questions, you can ask. You can raise your hand if you want to. Okay, so Ortile, when your answer is a fraction, in terms of checking, honestly, I would do it on my calculator. It's going to be a lot easier than trying to do it manually. However, if we quickly do a quick check, so this would be for question 1, guys. We would have 4 times negative 3 over 4 minus 1 all being divided by 2 is equal to negative 2. So it doesn't look very nice, and that's why I'm saying use your calculator. However, 4 times negative 3 over 4, the 4's cancel. And so what you actually have is minus 3 minus 1 divided by 2 equals negative 2. Minus 3 minus 1, sorry, I just want to make that bigger, gives you a negative 4 divided by 2. And so we can see that negative 4 divided by positive 2 is negative 2 equals negative 2. So honestly, Ortile, I would use my calculator. Like, it's a lot easier.